The book of Judges obviously picks up where the book of Joshua left off. In Judges, Joshua has died, leaving Israel leaderless. They are in the promised land, but they haven't quite finished the job of conquering everyone and taking it over for themselves. And in a sense, they've become complacent. Maybe they're just tired of all the battles and killing. Maybe they're just hungry for settling down in this new land, even if it means that they will have some troublesome neighbors. The problem is, in their complacency, they aren't just trying to live side by side with the other peoples there. The problem is that over and over again, they try and live just like their neighbors. They see these other people living in the land, and they have all these gods, and they have all these idols, and they have temples and shrines. They have these religious rituals. And the Israelites, they want in on that. And so, in Judges, there is a recurring pattern. First, the Israelites fall into some sort of apostasy. They worship a foreign god, they set up an altar, they start intermarrying with the pagan neighbors. Second, God gives them over to trouble, usually in the form of a marauding army who has come to destroy them. Third, Israel cries aloud to God, asking for God's help, the same God that they had just finished forsaking. And then fourth, God raises up a judge to gather an army and topple the marauders. Rinse and repeat over and over again. Apostasy, trouble, help, judge. Apostasy, trouble, help, judge. At this point in Israel's history, they aren't unified at all. They've forgotten a lot of things, and one of them is how to be one nation under God. In Judges, they are merely a collection of 12 tribes. They have no central governing structure, no capital city, no leader to turn to. In the ancient Near East, the concept of judge was very closely related to king. In fact, the Hebrew word for judge is intrinsically related to many other ancient Near Eastern language words for king or ruler. When it came to Israel, however, the concept of judge was notably different from king, because a king is a king at all times, and when the king stops being king, usually because they died, their crown passes on to the next in line. But the Israelite judges were only judges during the time of crisis. When the crisis was over, the judges' rule was over, and there was never any sense of their mantle of leadership being passed on through heredity. Judges 19 through 21 tells the incredibly troubling story of the Levite's concubine. In fact, this story is so incredibly awful and graphic that if you are triggered by stories of graphic sexual violence, I would suggest that you turn this video off and meet us at the next one. Really, it's totally okay if you do. Okay. As the story goes, there was a Levite, a man of the tribe of Levi, the priestly tribe. He had a concubine. Concubinage is sort of like marriage, but without all the actual marrying. It was a legal and perfectly moral relationship during those days, but it's a little weird to think about now. The man and the concubine have a falling out, and so the woman leaves the man and heads back to live with her father in Bethlehem. As so often happens, the Levite man misses this woman who he's broken up with, and so he travels to Bethlehem to convince her to return to him. After what we can only imagine was some serious groveling, the woman decides to rejoin the relationship and return home with him. You'd think that the father of the concubine would absolutely hate the Levite man, but no, the two of them get along great. And every time the Levite tries to head back home with his concubine, the concubine's father convinces him to stay another night. After 5 nights of this little dance where they try and leave and their father convinces them to stay, they finally set off for the journey home. They don't make it all the way, and they end up having to stay in a little town just outside of Jerusalem called Gibeah. They have trouble finding somewhere to lay their head in Gibeah until an elderly man invites them to stay with him. In an amazing parallel to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the townspeople of Gibeah assemble outside of the elderly man's home, and they demand that he send out the Levite so they can rape him. The laws of hospitality in the ancient Near East absolutely forbid someone to allow something like this to happen to someone whom you have taken under your roof. If you allow a traveler to spend the night with you, you are responsible for their safety. So the elderly man says that he absolutely will not send the man out, but the elderly man offers the concubine and his own daughter to be ravaged by the crowd in place of the Levite man. You might remember in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot makes the exact same offer. He says he's willing to send his daughter out to the crowd in place of the 3 men who had come to stay with him. In the terrifying situation in Gibeah, the Levite, a younger and more capable man, takes charge. He sends out his concubine into the crowd, where she is raped through the night. By the next morning, she is dead on the doorstep. In a horrifying twist to an already horrible story, the Levite picks up the corpse of his concubine, places her on his horse, and takes her to their home. Once there, he cuts her body up into 12 pieces and sends a piece of her to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. This thing that has happened is so horrible that he wants the whole nation to know the depths of the depravity that they have fallen into. In Judges 19:30, the immensity of the crime is rendered. There has not happened, nor has there been seen anything like this since the day the Israelites went up from the land of Egypt to this day. The nation is so disturbed by this terrible thing that a huge army is assembled, and 10,000 Israelite troops come down on Gibeah and annihilate the town. Just like in the previous commandment violations, where all the people are brought together to stone a commandment violator, here the nation comes together to try and right this terrible wrong. In Judges 20, verse 4, the concubine is referred to as the murdered woman. This little detail is important because this is the first time since the giving of the 10 Commandments that the Hebrew word for murder is used. That is notable because the early books of the Bible are no stranger to killings and death. It's an incredibly bloody part of the Bible. But in all of those passages, in all of those books, in all of those killings, the word murder is reserved until this particular story. And thus the 7th commandment, do not commit murder, is broken in the 7th book of the Bible. Of all the commandment violations, this is, I think, by far the most troubling. In fact, the story is just hard to tell. It's hard to read. We're a long way from someone gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. This commandment violation story is a stark reminder of the depravity that humans are capable of. The 10 Commandments weren't given to God's people just to make our lives harder or more inconvenient. They are given to rein in the evil that lurks inside of us. Because of that, you might want to take some time to think about and talk about the depths of the human condition.